She sold over 180 million records. She broke barriers that no one thought could be broken. She danced on stages that shook the ground beneath her feet. And for decades, she made the whole world stop and stare. But right now, Janet Jackson is facing something no amount of fame, money, or Grammy Awards can fix. At 59 years old, the woman who was once untouchable is going through one of the most painful, complicated, and raw chapters of her entire life. And here's what's shocking. Most people don't even know the half of it. Because Janet doesn't scream her pain from rooftops. She never has. She carries it quietly. She smiles for the cameras. She shows up. She performs. But behind that legendary smile, there's a woman dealing with grief, health battles, the weight of a complicated family legacy, the loneliness of superstardom, and the terrifying question that nobody talks about enough. What happens when the whole world knows your name, but you still feel completely alone? That's what this video is about. Not the tabloid headlines, not the gossip, the real Jana, the human being behind the icon. By the end of this, you're going to see her in a completely different way. So stay with me, because this story, it only gets deeper from here. Let's go back for a second. Because to understand what Jana is going through right now, you have to understand where she came from. She wasn't just born into a family. She was born into a machine. The Jackson family wasn't like your family or mine. From the very beginning, it was business. It was pressure. It was performance. Joe Jackson, their father, made sure of that. Jana was the youngest of the Jackson siblings. She watched her brothers get pushed, molded, and shaped into stars from childhood. And then it was her turn. She didn't choose the spotlight. In many ways, the spotlight chose her before she was old enough to understand what that meant. By the time she was a teenager, she was already on television. By the time she was in her 20s, she had exploded into one of the biggest pop stars on the planet. Albums like Control and Rhythm Nation 1814 didn't just sell, they changed culture. They changed the conversation about what a black woman could say, could demand, could become in the music industry. And yet, even at the height of all of that success, something was always underneath the surface. There were relationships that fell apart, marriages that didn't last, a body she was constantly being told to change, shrink, control, a family dynamic that was complicated in ways most people will never fully understand. And then came the moment that changed everything. The 2004 Super Bowl, 45 seconds that the entire entertainment industry used to bury her. One moment, and suddenly, the woman who had spent decades building one of the most iconic careers in music history was blacklisted, erased from radio, erased from award shows, while the man standing right beside her walked away completely unscathed. She didn't scream about it publicly. She didn't go on every talk show and fall apart. She just disappeared for a while, and when she came back, the world had already moved on. But Jana hadn't. Because some wounds don't heal just because the cameras stop rolling. And right now, at 59, all of those old wounds, plus brand new ones, are hitting her at the same time. This is that story. Let's talk about something that doesn't get brought up enough. Losing a sibling is devastating. Losing Michael Jackson, one of the most famous human beings to ever walk the earth, while also being his sister, while also grieving him privately, while the entire world is simultaneously exploding with shock and conspiracy theories. That's a specific kind of pain that very few people on Earth could possibly understand. When Michael died in 2009, Jana lost her brother, but she also lost something else, a person who, despite all the chaos, all the distance that fame creates, understood her in a way almost no one else could. They grew up inside the same machine. They shared the same scars from childhood. They both knew what it felt like to be shaped and controlled, and marketed from the time they were small. And grief like that doesn't just fade away because years pass. People assume that because Jana kept performing, kept releasing music, kept showing up, that she must have healed, that she must have processed it and moved on. But that's not how grief works, especially not for someone like Jana, who has spent her entire life being taught that showing vulnerability is not an option. In interviews over the years, you can see it. There's a careful wall that goes up the moment Michael's name is mentioned. A pause, a breath, a smile that doesn't quite reach her eyes. She's still carrying it. And then, in 2023, she released her documentary. And for the first time, really for the first time, the world got to see cracks in that carefully constructed armor. She talked about her relationship with her body, about being told she needed to lose weight as a teenager by her own father, about the complicated dynamics inside that family, about the loneliness. And audiences were stunned, because this wasn't the Jana from the music videos. This was a real woman, tired, reflective, still working through decades of pain. The grief didn't leave when Michael died. It expanded, and it's still expanding. Here's something that gets glossed over constantly in conversations about Jana Jackson. The woman has been at war with her own body for most of her adult life, and the entertainment industry handed her that weapon. Think about it. From the time she was a teenager, she was being evaluated, criticized, and monetized based on how she looked. Her weight was discussed in tabloids like it was public property. Her body transformations were treated like content, something for the world to consume and have opinions about. And Jana, like so many women in the spotlight, internalized that. She's talked about periods of extreme dieting, fluctuating weight, the emotional connection between food and pain, the way stress manifests physically when you've spent years suppressing it rather than expressing it. This is not a small thing. This is decades of psychological weight. No pun intended. That doesn't just disappear because you hit a certain age. And as she entered her late 50s, the conversation shifted again. Now, the tabloids weren't just talking about whether she'd lost or gained weight. They were commenting on aging, on what she looked like, on whether she was still relevant. Can you imagine? 50 years of giving everything you have to an industry, your creativity, your body, your privacy, and the industry's response as you age is to question whether you're still worth watching. That's a specific cruelty that Jana has had to navigate for years. But here's what's remarkable. Instead of retreating entirely, she started using her platform differently. She started being more honest. The documentary, the interviews where she finally pushed back, the battle with her body image is still real, but the way she's fighting it is evolving. And that takes a kind of courage that doesn't get nearly enough credit. Jana Jackson has been married 3 times. And every single one of those relationships tells you something profound about the woman behind the music. Her first marriage, to singer James DeBarge, happened when she was just 18 years old. 18. Still practically a child. Still figuring out who she was outside of her family's shadow. That marriage was annulled within a year. Then came Renee Elizondo Jr., a relationship that lasted almost a decade in secret before they finally married. And when that fell apart, it was ugly. Legal battles, public accusations, the very private pain of a very public dissolution. And then Wissam Almana, a billionaire businessman. A completely different world. They married in 2012, and in 2017, just months after Jana gave birth to their son Isa, the marriage ended. Think about that timeline for a second. She had her first child at 50 years old, and within months of bringing that child into the world, she was navigating a divorce. Being a brand new mother at 50 is already an enormous physical and emotional experience. Doing it while your marriage is collapsing, while you're still recovering from childbirth, while managing one of the most famous names in music history, that's not a tabloid story. That's a human being going through multiple life earthquakes simultaneously. The details around her split from Wissam were never fully made public. Jana kept most of it private, as she tends to do. But the weight of it, of another marriage ending, of raising a child alone, of learning once again that love doesn't automatically protect you from pain, that weight is visible if you look closely enough. And it raises a question that no one really asks Jana directly. After everything, does she still believe in love? His name is Isa. He's 7 years old. And for Jana Jackson, he is the most important thing in her world. Becoming a mother at 50 was not something Jana planned for her entire life. In interviews, she's talked about wondering whether it would ever happen, whether the timing would ever be right, whether her body would allow it, whether her life would have space for it. And then it happened, and everything shifted. Raising a young child as a single mother, while being one of the most recognizable women on earth, comes with layers of complexity that most people can't fully imagine. There's the security concern, the constant awareness that your child is also famous by association, before they've had a single chance to decide what they want for themselves. There's the scheduling reality, touring, recording, promotional obligations, all of it now filtered through the question of what's best for a small child who needs his mother present. And there's the emotional reality, the quiet moments, bath time, bedtime stories, school drop-offs, the ordinary, beautiful, grounding moments that Jana has spoken about with a kind of reverence that tells you everything about what motherhood means to her. But it's also hard, genuinely hard, because Jana is doing this largely alone. And at 59, with her own health considerations, with the grief she carries, with the industry pressure that never fully goes away, being the primary parent to a 7-year-old is both her greatest joy and one of her greatest challenges. She once said that Isa made her feel a kind of love she had never experienced before. You believe her completely when she says it, but love and exhaustion can exist in the same breath. And right now, Jana is living both. Let's be very clear about something. What happened to Jana Jackson after the 2004 Super Bowl was not an accident. It was not just bad luck or bad optics. It was a systematic, deliberate erasure. And it happened to a black woman. And the industry let it happen. She was removed from playlists. Award show invitations disappeared. Radio stations that had played her music for 20 years suddenly stopped. Her album Damita Joe, which came out just weeks after the Super Bowl incident, was effectively buried. Meanwhile, Justin Timberlake, who was literally there, who was part of the same moment, went on to one of the biggest solo careers in pop music, won Grammys, headlined Super Bowls again, was celebrated and welcomed at every table Jana was quietly removed from. It took years for the public conversation to catch up to what was obvious. The 2021 documentary framing Britney Spears reopened conversations about how the industry treats women. And suddenly, people started looking at Jeanette's story through a new lens. And what they saw was infuriating. Here was a woman who had literally shaped pop culture for decades, who had broken ground for countless artists who came after her. And she had been blacklisted for something that was not solely her fault. If it was her fault at all, the anger from fans was real. The reassessment was real. But here's the part that hurts most. The industry never formally apologized. The damage was never fully repaired. The years she lost, the momentum, the opportunities, the cultural space, those don't come back. And Jana, ever dignified, ever controlled, never made the scene that many people think she deserved to make. She just kept going, quietly, powerfully, on her own terms. But you don't go through that without scars. And those scars are part of the difficult chapter she's navigating right now. What Jana has been through physically is not a small thing. Over the years, she's been open, in carefully measured doses, about health battles that have affected her life and career. There have been periods of exhaustion so severe that tours had to be postponed. Times when her body was simply not cooperating with the schedule her career demanded. At 59, the body keeps score. Decades of intense performing, the choreography, the stamina required, the physical demands of being Jana Jackson on stage take a toll that doesn't become visible until later. She's talked about needing to listen to her body in ways she didn't in her 20s, about rest being a non-negotiable rather than a luxury, about the relationship between stress and physical health being something she had to learn the hard way. This is part of her current chapter, and it deserves to be spoken about with honesty rather than whispered about in tabloids. The Jackson family story is one of the most complex in American entertainment history, and Jana is still living inside that story. The loss of her father Joe in 2018 brought up a wave of complicated emotions, grief mixed with the complicated feelings that come when a parent was both a driving force and a source of deep pain in your life. The ongoing public disputes within the Jackson family over Michael's estate, his legacy, the documentary allegations, all of it touches Jana, whether she speaks about it publicly or not. She exists at the center of one of music history's most scrutinized families, and there is no clean exit from that. Family, for Jana, has always been both her anchor and her heaviest weight. People keep asking whether Jana Jackson is going to make a full-scale comeback. And the question itself says something interesting about how we treat artists as they age. Jana never fully left. She's been working, creating, raising her son, making music. But the entertainment industry and the media have a very specific idea of what a comeback looks like, and it usually involves proving yourself to an audience that stopped paying attention. Jana has nothing to prove. What she's navigating right now isn't about recapturing past glory. It's about figuring out what the next chapter looks like on her own terms. What she wants to create, what she wants to say, what she owes herself, not the industry, not the fans, not the legacy. That's actually a beautiful question to be sitting with at 59. And the answer? Watch how Jana carries herself through all of this. No explosive interviews, no public meltdowns, no Twitter wars, no desperate grabs for relevance. Just dignity, just quiet determination, just showing up for her son, for her art, for herself. And in doing so, she's teaching something incredibly powerful about resilience, about the difference between survival and grace. There's a generation of younger artists and young women watching how Jana handles difficulty, how she refuses to perform her pain for public consumption, while also refusing to pretend the pain doesn't exist. That balance, that's harder than any choreography she's ever learned. Nobody knows exactly what Jana Jackson's next chapter looks like. Maybe she records the album that says everything she hasn't been able to say yet. Maybe she steps back further, into motherhood, into privacy, into a life that belongs entirely to herself rather than to the public. Maybe she surprises everyone. Knowing Jana, that last option feels most likely. Because this is a woman who has been underestimated, erased, criticized, and written off before. And every single time, she came back with something that reminded the world exactly who she was. At 59, facing one of the most complex and emotionally layered chapters of her life, she is still that woman. The world just needs to remember to pay attention. Because when Jana Jackson has something to say, you do not want to miss it. If this story moved you, hit that like button. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And drop a comment below. What does Jana Jackson mean to you? Her story deserves to be told, remembered, and celebrated. Let's make sure the world doesn't forget.